and I want to assure you that if Governor Palin and I are elected in 46 days, we're not going to waste a moment in changing the way Washington does business, and we're going to start where the need for reform is greatest. In short order, we're going to put an end to the reckless conduct, corruption, and unbridled greed that have caused a crisis on Wall Street. Here and all across our country, people are wondering what exactly is happening on Wall Street, and with good reason. They want to know how their government will meet the crisis. Clear answers are hard to come by in Washington, D.C. As Senator Obama's leader in Congress memorably put it the other day, and I quote, "No one knows what to do." Perhaps given that reaction, it shouldn't surprise us that the congressional leaders of this do-nothing Congress also said that they weren't going to take action until after the election, that it wasn't their fault. And, you know, I'm very hopeful that last night's discussions are a sign they have changed their mind and will take action soon. But any action they take should be designed to keep people in their homes and safeguard the life savings of all Americans by protecting our financial system.
We're going to have to work quickly in a bipartisan fashion to resolve this crisis, to avert an even broader economic catastrophe. But in Washington, there also has to be a recognition that economic recovery requires that we act not just to address the crisis on Wall Street, but also the crisis on Main Street and around kitchen tables all across America. Even if the U.S. Treasury recovers some or most of its investments over time, this initial outlay of up to $700 billion is sobering. And in return for their support, the American people must be assured that the deal reflects the basic principles of transparency and fairness and reform. We can't allow this to happen again. They have run this economy into the ground. We've got to make sure that we lift it back up, but we've got to have some rules in place to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Government has a clear responsibility to act and to defend the public interest. That's exactly what I intend to do. First, to deal with the immediate crisis, I will lead in the creation of the Mortgage and Financial Institutions Trust, the MFI. The underlying principle of the MFI, or any approach considered by Congress, should be to keep people in their homes and safeguard the life savings of all Americans by protecting our financial system and capital markets. That has to be the fundamental principle. This trust will work with the private sector and regulators to identify institutions that are weak and fix them before they become insolvent. That's critical, before they become insolvent, unlike the RTC, who waited until they became insolvent. The MFI is an early intervention program to help financial institutions avoid bankruptcy, expensive bailouts, and damage to their customers. This will get the Treasury and other financial regulatory authorities in a proactive position instead of reacting in a crisis mode to one situation after another. The MFI will restore investor and market confidence, build sound financial institutions, assist troubled institutions, and protect our financial system while minimizing taxpayer exposure. This is a vital and important step, but it's not enough. I'll also take the additional actions needed to make sure a crisis like this is never allowed to build and break over the American people ever again.
First, there must be no blank check when American taxpayers are on the hook for this much money.
Second, I'll propose and sign into law reforms to prevent financial firms from concealing their bad practices. An inexcusable lack of financial transparency allowed Wall Street firms to engage in padded their profits, fattened executive bonuses when times were good, but now imperil the financial security of millions of Americans when their bets turn sour. So much of the damage to our economy could have been avoided if these practices had been exposed to the light of day. Americans have a right to know when their jobs, pensions, IRAs, investments, and our whole economy are being put at risk by the recklessness of Wall Street. And under my reforms for the financial sector, that fundamental right will be protected.
Second, taxpayers shouldn't be spending a dime to reward CEOs on Wall Street while they're going out the door.
Third, we need regulatory clarity. The lack of transparency in our financial markets somehow went unnoticed by the regulatory agencies scattered throughout Washington, charged with protecting the common good. We've got the SEC, the FDIC, the CFTC, the SIPC, the OCC, and the Fed. At best, at very best, this confusing assortment of regulators and institutions was egregiously lax in carrying out their responsibilities. At worst, they engaged in the old Washington game of guarding their bureaucratic turf instead of safeguarding the public interest and protecting investors. As you may know, yesterday I called for the resignation of the SEC chairman. He's a good man. There needs to be accountability in Washington. Accountability has been missing too long. You know, many in the financial services industry also either forgot or neglected their duty to act ethically and honorably. This shortcoming was aided and abetted by the creation of financial instruments that allowed lenders to escape any responsibility for the risk of their loans. In the past, lenders had to pay a price if they made a bad loan. Today, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac work with Wall Street to bundle together all these dicey subprime loans and then push them off on investors who didn't have the tools of transparency needed to assess or even understand the risk. The current system promotes confusion, encourages bureaucratic infighting, and creates incentives for financial firms to cut corners. We need to enhance regulatory clarity by holding the same financial activity to one regulatory standard. We don't need a dozen federal agencies doing the job badly. We need the best federal agencies to do the job right.
Third, taxpayers should be protected and should be able to recoup some of this investment.
Fourth, we must ensure that consumers and investors are protected. Our regulatory system must protect consumers and investors by punishing individuals who engage in fraud, break contracts, or lie to customers, like the predatory lenders who knew you can't afford an adjustable rate mortgage but misled you into signing one. These actions are criminal, and the people who commit them should be behind bars. And corporate governance rules will be reformed so that shareholders have a clear say in determining the pay of CEOs and other senior executives. On my watch, the consequences for corporate abuse will not be more enrichment, but more likely an indictment.
Fourth, this plan has to help homeowners stay in their homes.